Okay, Mr. Mayor, we are now live. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Approval of agenda. Is there any member like to add anything to agenda here today? Seeing none? The recommendation is that the agenda be approved as presented. Someone to move, put it on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carl. Forget about that. I'm going to call you Sue, if you don't mind, and Scott. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? All in favor of the motion, just a show of hands, please. That's carried. Declaration of pecuniary interest, you can clear anytime you see fit during the meeting. Minutes of the previous minutes. The recommendation is that the minutes of the BioGRID Joint Board of Management meeting held on December 17th, 2020 be approved. Someone to move to put it on the floor, please. Moved by Scott, second by Sue. Since I only have two. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? It's carried. Sorry, every time I touch my screen, I go mute. Okay, moving on to our agenda. Presentations, we have none. Delegations, we have none. Correspondence. We have a memo here from reports from the Derby wastewater treatment plant. I kind of laugh because I always refer to it as the lagoon. Anyway, the recommendation here is that the August to December 20th monthly reports from the Derby waste treatment plant be received for information. Someone to move, put on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlson, second by Mayor Mackey. And there I've changed. Steve, you want to make a comment on the name we have before us?
So when I threw you, Mr. Mayor, to committee, I was changing over the information from the previous director of operations to myself when I was doing the paperwork with MOECC, and then it came to my awareness that the lagoon's real legal name is called the Derby Wastewater Treatment Plant. So that is actually your legal name for your lagoon. So that's why it's listed that way, so that everybody is aware that is the actual legal name as per MOECC.
Thank you, Steve. Is there any discussion on any of those reports? Patty, did I see your hand up or no? Scott, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just wondering, I didn't really, well, there's so many numbers in there, but over the last few months, we were having the chloride issues. I'm just wondering if how the well testing is going with the chloride issues and whether the counts have been going down. Thanks.
Steve?
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, to committee member, Mr. Mackey. In regards to we are testing the wells quite a bit to make sure that the chlorides are going down. We are going to be looking to do another test well a little bit closer to the biodigester to see if there's actually more salt or the chlorides in that area. So we're going to try to figure out where all this stuff's going, but they are kind of going down here and there depending on what the freeze thaw temperatures and all that too. So we are seeing a little bit of reduction, but we are also trying to pinpoint where they are actually coming from.
Okay. There's no other discussion on the motion before us. All in favor? Is carried. We've no staff reports. Madam Clerk, was there any questions come in from the public?
There was not.
Thank you. We're down to unfinished business. A verbal update from Director of Operations regarding the ongoing feasibility study. Mr. Domar, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Mayor, to committee. Just kind of give you guys a quick update. Letters have gone out to all the adjoining municipalities and other potential, what would you call them, sponsors for the biodigester. We have had lots of feedback from them. We are currently setting up meetings for the next 2 weeks to go over some of the questions that were asked in the letter. It seems like there's a lot of drive right now for this biodigester, so we'll see what happens. In regards to a draft report, it will be coming to staff's review probably by the end of March, beginning of April, and then the final review of the report will be presented to the bio board in May when it comes through as well. So that'll be for the quick update on that feasibility study there. So just so everybody's aware.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Scott, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you to Steve. Steve, what was the letter that was sent out to neighboring municipalities? Can you just give a quick overview of what the ask was, or?
Just bear with me for 1 second and I'll get a copy of it to put up on the screen for everybody to see.
So was it reaching out to see what interest there is with neighboring municipalities in joint venturing going ahead?
Yes, that was part of the questions. There were 3 questions we did ask during our letter going out. So I'm just going to pull one up here real quickly. So I'm going to just kind of share the screen with everybody, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Can everybody see the letter that has gone out? Is on the screen okay?
I can see it.
Okay. So basically, we've gone through with the letter to all the potential stakeholders that we're looking for. The letter kind of goes into the background of what the biodigester does for the municipality and what the capabilities of what it is. I will send you guys a copy of this just so you guys have it for your reference. And then we came back with, at the time we were doing this process, we asked for 3 specific questions. Do you see conflict, challenges, or issues with the organization, business, operations in this study? We're asking also, do you see any opportunities for your organization, business during the study? And then also, do you want to be contacted to discuss the study further? So we've had quite a few potential stakeholders here that want to discuss the study further and ask some more potential questions that we're going to have part of that report.
Thanks, Steve. I look forward to that letter being sent out to everybody. That'd be great.
Okay.
Scott, does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it does, Mr. Chair. So were all the municipalities in Grey and Bruce County circulated with that letter, Steve?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mayor Mackey, that is correct. All lower tiers of Bruce and Grey County were circulated. Also, the upper tiers were circulated as well.
Scott, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm just for clarity, this letter, we're looking at potential interest. So are we going to do follow-up once the feasibility study has been complete and that report is complete? We would be sharing that with other member municipalities and reaching out for potential partnerships. Is that kind of the goal?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mayor Mackey, the intention is we bring the report back to this board first to adopt it or to do the recommendations, have discussions further on it as well, and then we release it out to become a public document that could be released to other municipalities or potential other stakeholders.
Okay. Thanks for that update, Steve. We'll move on for our agenda. We're down to new business. I have a recommendation here that the 2021 BioGRID Drawing Board of Management draft budget is hereby approved and that the draft budget be forwarded to the council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs and the council of the Township of Chatsworth for final approval. It's moved by Scott, second by Sue. Madam Treasurer, you want to take over?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can go through this together. So I did discover yesterday, sometimes there's a delay in this loading. So can everyone see my screen now?
I can, yes.
Okay, perfect. So
Cassie, if you could just make the font maybe a little bit larger.
yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
So this is the budget we have prepared for 2021. And what we did is we've shown you, we've also illustrated the past 3 years budget and actual so that you have a comparison, you know, of to what we've budgeted and to what has actually occurred. So as the board is aware, the bio budget is pretty bare bones. You know, I want to say we do what's necessary to keep the bio operating, but we haven't been investing any capital, any significant capital into the budget over the last several years. So when we look at the expenses, I'm not going to go line by line, but I am going to talk about some of the bigger costs that are incurred at the biodigester. So 2 of our biggest fees are generated, one from hiring GSS Engineering to oversee the biodigester. We also have a contract with Rights for the repairs and maintenance of the biodigester. And heat and hydro is also a significant cost because, you know, we got to keep that facility up and running. Salaries and benefits, what we do is we allocate a portion of Troy's Georgian Bluffs wages to the biodigester. It's probably understated, but Troy does not complete timesheets, you know, to accurately capture the amount of time spent at bio versus on Georgian Bluffs duties. So we allocate approximately 1/3 of his salary to the biodigester. Digestate disposal is also a significant cost to the bio. And our contract with Saugeen, sorry, I can't remember their exact name, Saugeen Agra, actually expired in December 2020. So we will be looking at bringing forward a new agreement with them for that disposal. On the revenue side, it's hard to look at 2020 because we know that 2020 was an unusual year. So that's why we've provided you, sorry, I'm trying to scroll this down and it doesn't want to do that for me. It's frozen. Come on. Seriously, frozen. Okay, let me try this again. Sorry. Every time I share my screen, it seems to be an issue. Okay, so I stop sharing. I'm going to scroll it. Nope, Excel in general is frozen for me. Apparently it's my Excel that's frozen and I can't even scroll down when not sharing. Let me try again.
Cass, I can share my screen for you and you can move through it as you see fit.
Sure, Britt. I just need to go down to the revenues. My computer's been acting up this morning, so my apologies. It's been a pain in the butt. Okay, so it's really hard for us to look at 2020 because we all know 2020 was an unusual year. A few things happened at the bio that affected the revenues. You know, sourcing materials during the winter is always a bit of an issue, so that fluctuates from year to year, which affects the hydro generation. Tipping fees, you know, a lot of the restaurants on the Sunset Strip, or a lot of the businesses on the Sunset Strip, saw different operations in 2020. Meaning, you know, they were closed up for some of the time. They did not have guests attending at some of the time, people working from home. So in an unusual year, it's really difficult to look at the revenues brought in because they are not consistent with any prior year's revenues. But what is consistent is that each year the Township of Georgian Bluffs and the Township of Chatsworth contribute $60,000 to the biodigester. That money in all of the prior years has not been enough. So each year we've been operating at a deficit, and then what happens is we once the year-end audit is done, we bill that deficit to each municipality. So I do think that the Bio Board strongly needs to consider, increasing what each township puts into the facility. But I do recognize that we have a couple studies going on right now to determine, how we're going to move this entity going forward. So I'm not proposing that for 2021 until we get, a bit more information behind us and, start to work on that business plan and how we're going to move this forward. For 2021, we are proposing some capital works. We are proposing to fund this from reserves. So the reason why we are doing that is because we understand that these studies are going on and that the board may not be willing to commit capital investment at this time. However, these capital projects are very important to the operation of the biodigester. So we do want to include them in the 2021 budget. So I'm actually going to ask our Director of Operations, Steve, to speak to the 3 items that he's bringing forward in 2021 for capital.
Go ahead, Steve.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to committee. So the 3 projects that we're proposing in 2021 capital is, we'll start with the low one, working our way up, is the gas booster. It's at its end of its life. It's going to take roughly about 12 weeks to get shipped from Germany over here for us to get it replaced. If this piece of equipment does decide to go on us this year, then we'd have to bring back a report later on to, get it. Then the biodigester will kind of go down in being able to provide services rendered. So we're trying to mitigate some potential downtime if we can kind of get that approved. The mixer replacement, we're currently at the end of its life as well. Once again, it's going to cost us more money if we had to go down and stuff like that for maintenance and stuff. So that's why we're kind of proposing it. And then also the biggest one here that I'm really proposing is the $100,000 for the membrane, the netting, and the clean out of the biodigester. If we don't do this, those maintenance tasks to the biodigester itself, we could be getting into more of a environmental spill / MOECC compliance issue, which then we get into a little bit more potential for fines, which would be a little bit more money than the maintenance cost alone. So these are something that we should be really considering to get done this year, and that's why I was looking at it from a reserve point of view. You do have quite a bit in the reserves to kind of fund it, while these feasibility studies do come back to the board for their review. So that's why we're looking at them right now. So it's just trying to stay within environmental compliance and then also to minimize the downtime as well.
Thank you, Steve. So I recognize that I forgot to inform the board the amount of money we currently have in reserves. So as of the end of December 2020, there's $477,000 being held in reserves for future capital. That amount is being held by each municipality, but that is what's currently in the future capital reserve. So I know that I gave a very high level description of the budget, but if any members have any specific questions, please feel free to ask.
Cassie, while we're getting the screen set up, I'd like to ask you the question on this reserve, $477,000. Is that like a split 50-50 or how does that work?
Yeah, each municipality holds half. So,
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Steve, before we start the meeting, you shared your screen showing the pictures of the biodigester. Were you going to show that again now, or?
I can show you what we're looking to propose so that you guys have a visual of where we're going to do the repairs, or the maintenance as well. So just bear with me for 1 second.
Sue, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. You're important today because we need you for a quorum.
And did everybody see the picture of the biodigester?
Yes.
Okay, so the netting portion is on top of the membrane. So if the netting is starting to have minor damage being done, so if this lets go, then the membrane has a potential for expanding too far and then becoming more of an environmental nightmare. So that's what we're looking at cleaning, is this tank here where all the biodigester occurs, along with the membrane replacement and the netting that goes on top of it, so that we can kind of show you where the money's going to be invested. So you will be able to see it up front as well.
Steve, a question while you still have that slide up there. I realize you shut the bio down, remove the netting and the top, and then you start cleaning out the complete inside from top to finish, I guess. How long does it take once that operation is done to reestablish the bugs to make it start working again?
So to be honest with the board here, I'd have to tender this process out. Different companies do it at different levels. So a lot of companies could, have equipment to go in and clean at the same time, doing repairs and stuff like that. So it'll vary based on what whoever gets the successful bidder of the tender through the procurement process is. So that would be, it could be down for 20 days to up to 45 max. That's worst case scenario.
Does this company that you may hire, or do they reestablish the bugs to start the process going again?
Yeah, all that gets included as well, part of that process, yes.
Okay. And the last question before I go to the board, is there any value in the netting for any other use for somebody?
At this time, there is no other, I would not recommend doing that. It'd be mostly just to move it to the next life cycle of it, putting in, getting rid of it completely. It wouldn't be any use to anybody.
Okay. Does the board have any questions on this motion or this picture before us? I don't believe I've seen any. Sue, I can't see your screen, so I take it you had no questions?
Actually, I did. I had my hand up, but if you can't see me, you wouldn't see that. Just a question about what that netting is made out of. Like, would getting rid of it be part of the RFP for doing the work? Would that be our responsibility or the successful bidder?
That would be part of the procurement process, which would be to the successful bidder. So they would do the full removal of it, and then they would be at their cost to dispose of it as well.
Scott, I seen your hand up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you to Steve. Steve, in the proposal here, you're mentioning both membrane and netting. I certainly understand your concern around the netting. The membrane itself, how degraded is it? And could just the netting be added without the membrane?
Through you, Mayor Burley, to Mayor Mackey, we would have to do a replacement of both at the same time. It's starting to get holes in it as well, so you're kind of at the point of it's past its life as well, so it needs to be removed as well and replaced. I wouldn't be able to save it at all.
Scott, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess my concern is until we report in June, we really don't know what the future is holding and what the best recommendations are going to. So I'm having a hard time committing, certainly the gas booster that Steve spoke about that has to come from Germany, that likely should be done. But spending $100,000 when we're not sure, going forward, what everything's going to look like, and we're only 2 or 3 months, I would feel better getting that report before we're committing our capital to this. That's my comments on that. So I'll leave that there, and I do have a couple of questions in regards to the budget when the time comes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further on with Scott's question, Steve, to proceed with a tendering process and so on to try and find a company that will do it and so on would take a bit of time, would it not? And is that something that the board could allow you proceed with that process without really giving final approval?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to committee there. Yeah, the tendering process will take some time to get somebody in here to do it, and then we can get more of a real time cost on how to replace and to dispose of the membrane and the netting. My only concern, and I'm going to put it out here, is if we don't do any maintenance work on this task, we are going to be in a potential chance for an MOEC potential fine because it is now deemed an environmental spill. So if this thing pops or blows holes and goes into the atmosphere, we are going to be potentially fined, which would be more money than what the maintenance cost is required. So I'm just going to put that there on the table.
Thank you, Steve. Cassie, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that was going to be my comment, is that because of the price tag, the board would have to award the RFP. So even if you approve the budget with this project included in it, you are not approving the project at the time because of the dollar value. You have to go through an RFP. The RFP cannot be awarded without the board and then approval of councils. So if you okay this budget and start this process, you still have the ability to stop it. So, you know, approving this could let Steve start to explore those options, and then it still has to come before the board for final approval.
Thanks, Cassie. That's what I was sort of indicating and suggesting that's what would happen. Before I leave that, Steve, a question to do with environment and MOE and so on. Is there any special guidelines you need and permits you need to be able to start this process too?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to committee, yeah, during this whole tendering process, we'll be adding the permit process to it as well, so that whoever is successful on it, they will be following environmental compliance when they have to do the maintenance and the removal. But
is that the board's or the two municipalities' responsibility, or be the person that does the contract?
It'll be the person who is awarded the contract. So once this tendering process is completed, then it will come back to the board for final approval, and all that would be outlined in that tendering process as well.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Does the board members have any other questions on this part before we go back to the budget? Scott, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So, Steve, you're saying there's a potential leak could occur at any time. Is there any way of shutting the biodigester down right now so that that leak potential is eliminated and we just divert the septage to the lagoon?
At this time, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Mayor Mackey, at this time, I would, you know, with the life cycle of when it's going to get repaired and all that, with staff being on site, they are monitoring the membrane constantly to make sure. It is something that we could take back to staff to have them review and let us know, and then we can bring something back forward to the board to give our recommendations.
Okay, Scott, does that answer that question for you?
Well, yeah, I think it's an important part, Mr. Chair. Like, I certainly don't want to see either of our municipalities with a fine from the Ministry of Environment. And, you know, sitting here knowing that there's a potential for basically a leak at any time, I would feel better having, you know, the plant's been shut down before. And I think this is a more valid reason to look at shutting it down over the next couple of months to avoid you know, any potential. We're spending a lot of money for gas generator, for hydro generation, and we're not getting the you know, the value back. Again, this is all just in the timing of things. I don't like the thought that we have a potential leak here. So I personally, you know, if there's a way of doing it, it would bring more comfort to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I would not support that, but Mr. CEO, I see you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just sort of throw this into the mix for the committee's, the board's consideration is, you know, I've taken a tour through it. I'm concerned that if we shut down the bio facility for any period of time, the actual startup, I'm worried that you're going to be incurring some significant charges. You know, with mechanical equipment, it needs to continue on, and if it has a prolonged period where it is not operational, my fear is that the cost to actually reopen it and restart it, if that's the decision that's going to be made, is going to require a lot more capital to get done. So, you know, the Mayor Mackey's point is well done. I mean, it's a risk that you have in terms of having an environmental leak. To me, you're rolling the dice, but it's no different whether the equipment was brand new or is starting to age. That's a sort of a risk that you have ongoing by operating it, but you have a calculated risk, and as the material and as the equipment approaches its end of life, which it is now, the prudent thing is to get it replaced and make sure that you're operating under the safest conditions possible. I would just encourage the board to really consider what you're asking us to do here, because it could potentially cost both municipalities a lot more under either scenario, either not replacing the recommended capital improvement or shutting it down for a few months, with then potentially opening it up again a few months later. So I would encourage some real consideration here before you go down that path.
Thank you, Al. Sue, could you put your screen on and then so I could see if you want to comment, because I can't really see.
My video is on.
Not on my screen.
Okay, let me turn it off and back on again.
While we're waiting for Sue to come back on, my opinion is that I would not agree to shutting the biodigester down temporary. I do agree 100% with Scott's way of thinking that we won't make that final decision until we put the RFP out to see what the actual cost is going to be and so on forth, and to give the time for these feasibility studies to come back to us before we make those final decisions. And I tend to agree that we should continue with the process to allow Steve to proceed with what he has to do so that'll happen. I agree with that, but I cannot support shutting the biodigester down at this time. Sue, I guess we lost Sue. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Deputy Mayor Carlton has indicated that her laptop has frozen, so she has left the meeting.
So, Madam Clerk, we do not have a quorum.
Actually, I'm back on. I switched over to my iPad, so I should be back on.
There she is.
Okay.
So, any comments on what we were discussing? Because I could not see you, Sue.
No comments.
Scott, I seen your hand up, I believe.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And through you, I just wonder if Patty could have a minute. I'd just like to hear her thoughts on the discussion. Thanks.
All means. Go ahead, Patty. You're muted, Patty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, you know, this is sort of tied to our Part B RFP, our joint RFP that we're doing in terms of what are the impacts of shutting it down or putting it on pause if that's what the outcome is. My concern would be the same as Al's in terms of what are those unknown costs to start it back up. You know, I think the idea of having Steve move forward with the RFP makes perfect sense. You know, I hate to move forward on a wing and a prayer, but quite honestly, you know, I think we just have to hope that there aren't any issues with that membrane in the meantime, you know, to at least get the RFP results back regarding, you know, both the Part A in terms of how we move forward with possible partnership, or the Part B, failing that, the Part B with regard to the, putting this thing on pause. So I would really be hesitant, to be honest, to put it on pause at this time, and just hope that we don't have a membrane break or any issues in the meantime.
Thank you, Patty, and I agree 100% with your statements. The only comment I would like to make on that is that I believe that the board has shown good stewardship by proceeding with a replacement of this membrane and so on in case there is an environmental disaster. None of us want to see that happen, but it's a risk that I'm willing to take, and I think it's very important that we do show that we're trying to work in good faith with the environment to correct a problem we know that could potentially happen. Go ahead, Patty.
Yeah, just, in terms of timing, and Steve's absolutely right. I mean, it takes a while to put an RFP together and get it posted and, wait for those results to come back. In the meantime, I think we're looking at possibly May to review the first part of the RFP. I think our timeline on Part B is June. So, I think it's important to keep that moving, and at least get a cost as to what this membrane might actually cost us.
Thank you, Patty. And over to you, Steve. Do you have any indication of how many, I'll refer to them as contractors, there might be to do this kind of work? And is it a thing that may be a problem finding?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to committee, right now there's, from what I gather from looking online and all that, there's roughly about 6 to 7 different contractors in the Southern Ontario portion that would be able to do the work prescribed.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other questions on this part? I'm going to refer to it as the membrane replacement part. If there's no other questions on it, we'll go back to the budget. And I believe, Scott, you had some questions on the budget itself.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions, under the, I guess if I start at the top, under the salaries, last year's salary, and that, as Cassie mentioned, that may be related to
Scott, can you just,
COVID.
Scott,
Pardon?
could you wait just for a minute? Madam Clerk, could you put that back up on the screen, please?
Yep, just give me 1 sec.
Thank you. Sorry, Scott.
No problem. So just my question, starting near the top under salaries. For the last couple of years, well, they were budgeted at 25,000. Last year came in at 18. That may have averaging it. I'm just wondering why there is a jump to 30,000. So that was my first question.
Cassie, you want to respond to that?
Thank you. So as stated, staff do believe that Troy spends much more than 1/3 of his time at the bio. So this year, Troy's going to monitor his time more closely on bio versus Georgian Bluff's duties. And we're anticipating you're going to see more of his time spent at bio than we've previously allocated in the past.
Okay, thank you. There's a jump, so going down under the asterisk, and the admin fee is going from 20,000 to 30,000 in the budget.
So the admin fee is not changing. That's a set amount. I believe the bio pays Georgian Bluffs $10,000 per year. It's the cost for rights. So we have a monthly maintenance cost that we pay to rights, and then sometimes the additional works they have to do are billed out extra. So it was increased to better reflect actuals.
Does that answer your question, Scott?
But the actual last year was $20,000, 20,848.
So these are unaudited numbers. We're still working through it. But Troy, correct me if I'm wrong. Was the bio down for a little bit last year? Are you here now?
Steve, you able to answer that question? Patty?
Yeah, I can answer that. It was down for several months, actually.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, that would be why.
A question, before I go to you, Scott, a question on the right portion. Steve, could you comment, do they mainly do with the generator maintenance and so on? What other parts do they work on? Is that all they work on?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to the boards, they work on pretty much everything that's within the biodigester. So if there's like a faulty issue with other components, they do look after those as well for us and help us out.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, thanks. And at the bottom of the expenses, the last line under capital, why is it showing up there and not under the transfer from Georgia Bluffs transfer from capital under revenues?
Cassie?
So sorry, there's the capital highlighted in blue at 119,000, right? That's offset under miscellaneous revenues because it's going to be a contribution from reserves, not from each municipality. So technically, even though each municipality is holding the money, it's in reserves. So when you actually do the transfer, it'll show as miscellaneous revenue. If you actually do the transfer.
Okay, thanks, Cassie. So, Mr. Chair, my next question is under the revenues, and
go ahead.
It has to do with hydro generation. We've got 80,000 down, for the last number of years, but we've not been able to get close to that amount. I would rather see, for a true picture of what the average over the last number of years has been for revenue. I think it's just a little misleading to expect we're going to get $80,000 when we're likely closer to $40,000 or $50,000 in revenue. So that's a comment on that one.
So if you, again, it's difficult to compare that, right? So if you look at 2018, we were almost to the 80,000. In 2019 and in 2020, we had some issues where the plant was down. So, that's one of those things that's really hard to predict. It's difficult to say, if we're going to operate smoothly all year with no downtime. In 2019 and 2020, that wasn't the case. But in 2018, we did meet that mark. I mean, I have no issue decreasing that line if you want. But to make this balance, it's going to be an increase in the line to Georgian Bluffs and Chatsworth.
I certainly recognize that, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd rather have a pleasant surprise at the end of the year with a surplus than I would a negative amount. So, when we present to our councils, I just like a truer reflection of what's likely anticipated. When you look at the budget to actual, in 2019, budgeted expenses were 365 and actual was 414. Budgeted revenues were 365, but actuals were 281. So, it's an additional, roughly $60,000 that each municipality has to make up on top of the already transfer that we make of 60,000. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Any other comments from board members on this budget? Patty, I think I see your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions to Cassie on the 2020 actuals. Let's see here. So under other services, the 32,263. Can you just remind me what that was for, Cassie?
Go ahead, Cassie. You're looking?
So that was the rental of the heater to keep the bio operating. And then eventually in the year, you actually bought that heater. So
Okay,
that's
that's what I thought. So, so my question for the 2021 budget, what I don't see is the amount for the joint RFP that we approved in, I think, December. And that was 30, just about 32,000.
Yep, that was missed. I can add that in.
Okay, so that was that portion. And one more question, if I might. The loss or gain on disposal of assets. So which asset was that?
That was your engine rebuilds.
Okay. Right. Okay. Right. Okay. So we had so basically a write-off of the 43,456. And then we also had the additional expense of the 32,000 to try and keep the darn thing running, right? That was for the rental. Well, okay. Thank you. Dwight's shaking his head. So that's what I just needed to refresh my memory. So thank you. That's all of my questions. But yeah, I think we do need to add in the 32,000 for the Part B RFP.
Thank you, Patty. Very, very good questions. Is there any other questions on the budget? I see all these little faces on the bottom of my screen.
Dwight.
Cassie, go ahead.
So making that adjustment that we just discussed, that would change the transfer from Georgian Bluffs and Chatsworth to be 78,350. So we can reflect that. If the board would like to see the hydro generation reduced, that revenue line, we could reduce it by 40,000. Add that to the contributions from both Georgian Bluffs and Chatsworth, and that would bring the total for each of those lines up to 108,350. So does the board want to make that change to the hydro generation amount, or are we hopeful we have a good year and we actually produce, you know, in line with our 2018 numbers?
The only comment I can make, Cassie, on that is that it's a very unusual year since we are going to be shutting down the facility to change the webbing and so on and so forth. So we're going to basically lose 2 or 3 months of time. So maybe we should consider that and make that adjustment right now, because I really can't see us meeting our target amount with what we have going on, with me go on. So I think it would be a good idea if we did reduce it, as Scott has indicated, to as close to true figures as we can. That's my opinion. Any other comments from the board? Patty, go ahead.
I just wonder, in terms of that 119,000 miscellaneous revenue, whether just for transparency, if we should show that as a contribution from Georgian Bluffs and Chatsworth, as opposed to miscellaneous revenue.
Cassie?
So that's not how it shows on the books. That's the problem. Okay. So if you look at your financial statements, each municipality has already logged that. So right now, what's due to the reserves is showing as a due to, due from on the balance sheet. Okay. So when we actually forward that money, it's not going to hit the income statement from Georgian Bluffs and Chatsworth. it's going to hit the balance sheet. What hits the income statement is the transfer from reserves. So the reason why it's not a contribution from Georgian Bluffs and Meaford is because that contribution has already been recognized in the past. And that's why you see it as an AR on the balance sheet. Like, this is getting very accounting technical, but that's why we can't show it that way. I could change the title to be transfer from reserves, as that's more accurate.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's kind of part of the flaw in the way that we're handling this capital. If it was up to me, capital that's budgeted, that money would automatically be transferred, held by the bio board in a bank account, and be shown in the financial statements that way. But that's not what this board has chosen to do.
Right.
You've chosen to set it up as a due to, due from, essentially, from each municipality. But I have no problem with changing that as that line as a transfer from reserves. It's just when we do the export from our accounts, that's the name of the account. That's not a problem.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Cassie, if we could show it as a transfer reserve, to me, that shows that it's coming from the municipalities as opposed to, is there a third party that's making this contribution? I understand it, but, trying to be transparent to the public, I think it just shows it better that it is in fact coming from the two municipalities.
I agree.
So just to follow up, did I get clear direction from the board that you would like to see that hydro generating line changed, reduced to 40,000?
I think we were still having comments on it. I made my comment why I'd like to see it reduced. Scott, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree that 40,000 is probably a good amount to reduce it to this year.
Thank you. And the justification for that would be because what we may be doing for repairs at the bio would be a good reason why. I see heads nodding, I think. Sue, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Cassie. So if we reduce that to 40,000, that would be 20,000 each municipality. Can you just confirm for me then what the total amount would be that's being transferred from each municipality then after we've done all those adjustments?
I believe it was 108,350.
Just wait, I'm updating it in my spreadsheet and something's not working. I just need a minute.
Welcome, Cameron. I see you're on the screen now.
It's Carmen. Yep. Thank
Carmen,
you.
sorry. That's the true face of an accountant, a treasurer. Look at her.
Sorry, my math in my head was off today. It's not 108,000. I need to learn to add. It's 98. That's why. Okay, so I have it all updated. I'm going to share my screen right now. Apparently, I can't add 20 to 70 today and get the right number, so my apologies. Oh, okay. So I'll share my screen so you guys can see as revised in our discussions today. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
I can, yes.
Okay, so as discussed, this line right here, I've added the $32,000 to reflect the joint RFP. Thank you, Patty, for letting us know that we had missed that. I've adjusted the hydro generating to be $40,000 in the budget. And then the resulting, I've changed I've changed the title of the transfer of reserves to better reflect what has taken place. And I've adjusted the transfers from Georgian Bluffs and Chatsworth to reflect what was discussed today.
Good. Looks good. Thank you, Cassie. Any questions on these changes to our proposed budget? I can't see any. So can we go back to full screen, please? Yeah. Does the board have any other questions on the motion before us? I assume, Madam Clerk, will adjust our motion to reflect changes?
We'll simply adjust the motion to reflect as amended.
Yeah, that's the words I was trying to look for. Yes. Scott, did I see your hand up?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just a comment. I recognize that this is the changes to the budget that are required, but I'm having a difficult time continuing to put this amount of money into $40,000 or $50,000 in hydro generation. So I certainly look forward to the report coming to the board and to our councils. We need to find a way to bring in other partners. We need to find a way to minimize the costs. Thanks.
Excellent comment, Scott. Is there any other comments coming from the board or staff? So we'll vote on the amended motion with the changes to it and so on. All in favor? The motion has been carried. Okay, so we'll move on. Cassie, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Patty, I will send the revised spreadsheet to yourself for you to include and for your discussion at council. I'll send that right now, and I'll send it to our clerk as well for inclusion on our agenda.
Thank you. If there's no other discussion on the budget, Steve, did I see your hand up? No, just batting flies. Okay, so we'll move on. We have no closed session here today. The date of our next meeting will be the call of chair. If there's no other discussion, I'll ask for adjournment of this meeting. Moved by Sue, second by Scott. Madam Clerk, I see your hand up.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. Our Director of Operations did have his hand raised. I believe he wanted to add something with the approval of the board. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the board, sorry for that. I was just wondering, or I was hoping for guidance from the board here. We were offered a couple loads of SSO to try out at the biodigester, and we were looking for the board's approval to kind of waive the tipping fees for 6 loads, just to try it out with the biodigester to see if it will actually, how it's going to work and run and all that stuff. So that's what I was just trying to kind of sneak in there at the end here. Sorry.
No problem. Comments from the board? Sue, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If this were to work out, then is this an ongoing supply that we would have further down the road? This is just a trial to see if it works?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the board, that is correct. This is a trial just to see if it's going to work properly, and if it does, there's that potential for it to come in and make us have a partner as well for potential SSO coming in.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Scott, I believe I've seen your hand.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I would recommend that we, waive that charge. It would enable us to find out how the biodigester can work with the source separated and help us going forward when we're reaching out to other potential partners. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Question for you, Steve. You and Troy obviously have checked into the product won't cause us any future harm to cause us cost to clean up any mess that comes in from it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the board, that is correct. We've looked at it. It won't bring any harm or any foul to the biodigester plant.
Good, thank you. So Madam Clerk, do we need a verbal direction, or do we want to present a motion to accept the Director of Operations recommendation?
If I may, if we could just have a show of hands in favor of waiving the tipping fees for those 6 loads, please. Thank you, and that carries.
Okay. Director of Operations, you got your orders? Okay. So going back to what I was originally saying, we've no other business here today. I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Scott, second by Sue. That we all adjourn. All in favor?
Mr. Chair,
Look.
sorry, Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
sorry, I had one further question, just to Steve in regards to the organics.
Go ahead.
Steve, how will they be added to the biodigester? What's the process for taking a load of source separated right now, just for the board's general knowledge?
Gotta go in the hydrolyzer. Go ahead, Steve.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the board, it'll be coming in a smaller truck, so it'll actually come down to our site and then dump into the tank properly, the way that we normally would do with our material. So we are gonna have a smaller trucking company coming in with it. So that's how we're gonna do this test on this material.
So that'll go
Thank you.
that'll grade into the hydrolyzer, or
That is correct.
okay.
Thank you.
So is there any other business here today? See none, I have a mover and a seconder on the motion to adjourn. All in favor? We're now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.